I always thought we had a strong marriage. My wife and I shared everything, or so I believed. We had been together for years, building a life on what I thought was a foundation of trust, love, and understanding. We weren't perfect, but we were a team. Or at least that's what I told myself every time doubt crept into my mind. But over the past few months, something felt undeniably off. It wasn't one big thing, just a collection of little moments that didn't add up. Her behavior began to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. She started staying late at work more often, claiming looming deadlines, surprise meetings, and office emergencies as the reason. At first, I didn't question it. I mean, who hasn't had to put in extra hours at some point in their career? But it wasn't just the late nights, it was how she acted when she was home. Her phone, once casually left on the coffee table or kitchen counter, became a permanent fixture in her hand. It never left her side, not even when she went to the bathroom or when we were eating dinner. She'd smile faintly at her screen, typing quickly before flipping the phone face down. Her excuses became more polished, more rehearsed. She'd tell me she was exhausted from work but still had enough energy to spend an hour on her appearance every morning. New outfits appeared in her wardrobe, ones I'd never seen her wear around me. She swapped her usual light makeup for something bolder, more alluring. I wanted to believe it was just her taking pride in herself, wanting to feel confident, but the timing of these changes felt too coincidental. The intimacy between us also started to fade. Conversations became surface level, brief exchanges about work, groceries, and house chores. The way she looked at me changed too. It was like she was somewhere else entirely, even when we were sitting right next to each other. Sometimes I'd catch her staring blankly at her phone screen, lost in thought. And if I asked her what was wrong, she'd brush it off with an easy smile and a quick excuse. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells around someone I used to know so well. And yet, despite all the red flags, I kept trying to convince myself that I was overthinking. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was letting my insecurities get the best of me. After all, she was my wife, the woman I promised to trust and support through everything. But doubt has a way of growing roots, spreading through every thought until it's impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about the late nights or the phone glued to her hand anymore. It was the way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, the hesitation before she answered simple questions, and the overly defensive tone whenever I expressed even the mildest concern. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was pulling her away from me. I started noticing patterns. Her so-called work emergencies always happened on the same nights. Her explanations sounded less convincing the more I heard them. I felt trapped in a constant cycle of suspicion and guilt, unsure whether I was losing my mind or uncovering a truth I wasn't ready to face. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine. Smiling through dinners, holding conversations while my mind raced with questions I was too scared to ask. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but a small part of me still clung to hope. Hope that I was wrong, that she was just going through a phase, or maybe dealing with something she didn't know how to share with me. But deep down, the unease grew, gnawing at me until it became impossible to ignore. I couldn't look at her without feeling like I was staring at a stranger. And no matter how many times I told myself to let it go, the feeling lingered, whispering to me that the truth was far worse than I was ready to admit. The moment of realization came during an office party. I wasn't supposed to be there, but one of her coworkers casually mentioned it to me in passing a week prior, assuming I already knew. I played it cool, acted like I was in on the plans, and decided to show up unannounced. In hindsight, that decision was the turning point. I arrived at the venue and scanned the crowd, looking for her among the clusters of coworkers. The room was filled with laughter, drinks being poured, and casual chatter. But when I finally spotted her in the far corner of the room, my stomach dropped. She was standing with her boss, and something about the way they interacted made my skin crawl. He stood just a little too close, leaning in every time she spoke, and his hand occasionally lingered on her arm or back when he laughed. And she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't just a polite work smile, it was a smile filled with familiarity, with something that felt ... intimate. Their body language told a story, one I wasn't supposed to see. They didn't notice me at first. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, watching as they exchanged glances, whispered something I couldn't hear, and laughed like they were sharing an inside joke. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea creep over me. I could have walked over, confronted them right there in front of everyone, but I didn't. I turned around and left the party without saying a word. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every little detail from the party, the way he leaned in, the way she smiled, the casual touches that no married woman should be sharing with her boss. I kept telling myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe it was all innocent. But deep down I knew better. Instinct doesn't lie, and mine was screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. In the days that followed, I began to pay closer attention to her behavior. I started noticing how her phone would light up with notifications late at night, how she'd smile briefly before locking the screen and setting it face down on the nightstand. I also started keeping track of her work schedule, noticing how her late nights conveniently aligned with times I knew her boss would also be at the office. It felt like every new observation was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I checked our shared credit card statements, something I'd never done before because I trusted her implicitly, but trust had become a luxury I couldn't afford, and there it was, charges I couldn't explain. Hotel bookings under her name. Dinners at upscale restaurants I'd never been invited to. Spa treatments she'd never mentioned. Each line on the statement was a blow, a piece of evidence I couldn't ignore. I even went as far as following her one evening when she said she was staying late for a critical client meeting. I parked my car across the street from her office building and waited. Hours passed, but eventually I saw her leave. But she wasn't alone. Her boss walked out with her, his hand grazing her back as they disappeared into a nearby hotel. I felt like I was watching my world fall apart from behind the glass of my windshield. That night, as I sat alone in my car, staring at the brightly lit hotel sign, I realized there was no turning back. I had all the confirmation I needed, but it still felt unreal, like some terrible movie plot I'd stumbled into. I couldn't go home and pretend everything was fine anymore. I couldn't keep swallowing the lies and painting over the cracks in our marriage. Each discovery, each observation, each gut-wrenching moment brought me closer to one conclusion: I needed undeniable proof. Proof that couldn't be twisted into another excuse or deflection. Proof that would make her face the reality of what she had done. Because while my heart was breaking, my mind was already planning the next move. I knew I couldn't confront her without solid proof. The kind of proof she couldn't twist or explain away with more polished excuses. Every conversation with her felt like walking through quicksand. I'd bring up my concerns, and she'd pull me back down with carefully chosen words, hollow reassurances, and the occasional tear-filled apology that never really addressed anything. I had to be smarter this time. If I was going to face her, I needed evidence so undeniable that even she wouldn't be able to gaslight me out of it. The plan started to form in my head late one night when I was lying awake in bed while she slept peacefully beside me. The weight of the situation felt suffocating, but I knew what I had to do. I told her a few days later that I had to leave town for a work trip. I made sure my story was airtight, shared fake emails with travel details, packed a suitcase, and even left the house at the crack of dawn, making sure she thought I was really gone. But I didn't go far. I checked into a small motel a few miles away and parked my car out of sight. Before leaving, I had set up cameras around the house. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I positioned them carefully, one in the living room, one in the hallway near our bedroom, and another near the front door. I made sure they were discreet enough not to draw her attention. As I set them up, I felt a sickening pit in my stomach. This was my home, our home, and now it felt like a trap. On top of the cameras, I installed an app on her phone that tracked her location. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do to someone I loved, but trust was long gone, and desperation had taken its place. I reminded myself that if I was wrong, if she really was just overworked and distracted, it would all be for nothing, and I'd find a way to live with the guilt of crossing that line. The first day passed uneventfully. She went about her usual routine, texting occasionally and watching TV in the evening. But on the second day, everything changed. Around 7 p.m., she walked into the living room wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something sleek and far too elegant for a casual night at home. She checked her phone, fixed her hair in the hallway mirror, and then unlocked the front door. Her boss walked in like he owned the place. He wasn't cautious, wasn't sneaky, he was comfortable. They sat on the couch, wine glasses in hand, laughing and talking. The sight made my skin crawl. Watching the woman I loved, my wife, smile like that at another man in our home was a kind of pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. When they moved from the couch toward the bedroom, I turned off the footage. I had seen enough. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with anger, hurt and disbelief. I wanted to storm into the house right then and there, to confront them in the middle of their twisted little fantasy, but I held back. I couldn't afford to lose control, not yet. I spent the night replaying the footage, every second of it etched into my mind like a scar. I told myself over and over again that this was the proof I needed, the undeniable evidence I'd been searching for. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, I packed up my things from the motel, wiped away any evidence of my stay, and prepared to go home. I knew the confrontation would be ugly, explosive even, but there was no turning back now. Every lie, every excuse, every carefully planned cover-up had led to this moment. She thought she was being sneaky, thought she was outsmarting me, but she had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of that door. I didn't sleep the night before I went home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them laughing on our couch, moving toward our bedroom without a shred of guilt or hesitation. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts raced so fast I could barely keep up with them. By the time morning came, I was running on nothing but adrenaline and raw anger. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every mile that brought me closer to the confrontation made my stomach churn, but I knew there was no turning back. When I walked through the front door, she was in the kitchen making coffee, wearing one of my shirts like nothing had happened. She looked up and smiled, acting surprised to see me back early. It was the same smile she'd given me 1,000 times before, but now it felt fake, plastic, and hollow. I didn't say a word at first. I just stood there, staring at her, letting the weight of everything I knew sink in. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the TV. As the footage started playing, her smile faded, her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock as she realized what she was watching. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I watched as every excuse, every lie, died on her lips before they could even form. There was no room for denial, not this time. After a long silence, she finally managed to speak. Her voice was trembling, her hands shaking as she reached out toward me. She said she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But every word felt like a slap in the face. Sorry? A mistake? You don't accidentally let your boss into your home, pour him wine, and lead him into your bedroom. That wasn't a mistake, that was a choice. A series of deliberate choices made over and over again. Then came the excuses. She said she'd been feeling neglected, that I was too busy, too distant. She tried to twist it around to make it seem like I was the reason she did what she did. It was classic manipulation, and maybe a few months ago I would have fallen for it. But not now. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd uncovered. Her boss, on the other hand, wasn't going to get off lightly either. While she tried to bargain with me, I made it clear that I had already sent the footage to his company's HR department. His career, his reputation, they were about to come crashing down, just like my marriage had. She started crying, pleading with me to forgive her, to give her another chance. But I couldn't. The trust was shattered beyond repair, and no amount of apologies could glue those pieces back together. I told her to pack her things and leave. Watching her walk away, dragging her suitcase out the door, should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. It just felt empty. When the door finally closed behind her, I sank onto the couch, the same couch where she had sat with him, and let the silence wash over me. The house felt different now, colder, quieter. Every corner, every room felt tainted with betrayal. I thought confronting her would give me closure, that exposing her lies would make me feel victorious. But the truth is, there are no winners in betrayal, just broken trust, shattered hearts, and a hollow space where love used to live. The confrontation had been necessary, but it came at a cost I was only beginning to understand. In the days that followed, I replayed the confrontation over and over in my head, wondering if I could have done anything differently. But deep down, I knew the outcome would have been the same. She had made her choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. All I could do now was pick up the pieces and try to move forward, one painful step at a time. The days after she left felt surreal, like I was trapped in a fog that refused to lift. The silence in the house was deafening. Every room felt hollow, every corner carried a memory that stung like salt in an open wound. Her scent still lingered on the pillows, her favorite mug was still in the kitchen sink, and a half-read book sat on the nightstand. It was as if she had only stepped out for a moment and would walk back through the door at any second. But she wouldn't. I had made sure of that. I spent hours replaying everything in my mind, every red flag I had ignored, every gut feeling I had brushed aside. I wondered how long she had been slipping away from me, how many moments had been stolen by her and her boss while I was at work, oblivious to the reality unraveling around me. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was calculated, repeated, and carried out right under my nose. Friends reached out, offering words of comfort and encouragement, but none of it felt real. They said things like, "You deserve better," or "It's her loss," but those words felt empty. Deserving better didn't erase the images burned into my mind. It didn't silence the late-night questions that haunted me. Was I not enough? Could I have done something differently? Did she ever really love me? I tried to keep busy. I threw myself into work, picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned years ago, and even started going to the gym just to exhaust myself enough to sleep at night. But no matter how hard I pushed, there was always a quiet moment waiting to drag me back into the memories. The nights were the worst. The empty side of the bed was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. Her boss didn't escape unscathed either. The footage I sent to his company had consequences. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was fired almost immediately after the video surfaced. His marriage, yes, he was married too, crumbled under the weight of his actions. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing his life had also been turned upside down, but another part of me realized that revenge didn't heal wounds. It didn't fix anything, it just left more destruction in its wake. At some point, I realized I had to stop letting her betrayal control me. She had already taken so much from me, my trust, my peace of mind, my sense of security. I couldn't let her take whatever pieces of myself I had left. Healing wasn't easy. It wasn't a straight path or a sudden realization. It was slow, messy, and full of setbacks. I started small. I cleaned the house, removing every trace of her presence. The sheets were replaced, her belongings packed up and donated, and every corner was scrubbed clean of the memories that haunted me. It felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming the space as my own. Eventually, I stopped checking her social media, stopped wondering if she was thinking about me, or if she regretted what she had done. I realized that those answers wouldn't change anything. Whether she regretted it or not, the damage was done. The life we had built together was gone, and no apology, no excuse would ever bring it back. In time, I started feeling lighter. The ache in my chest began to fade, and the house, once a prison of memories, became a place of quiet comfort. I wasn't fully healed. I don't know if you ever fully heal from something like this, but I was learning to live with the scars. Betrayal has a way of changing you, of reshaping the way you see the world and the people in it. But it also teaches you something valuable: resilience. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive the unimaginable and still stand back up. Looking back, I don't regret setting the trap. I don't regret uncovering the truth, no matter how painful it was. Because the truth, as harsh as it may be, is always better than living in a lie. And now, as I close this chapter of my life, I know one thing for certain: I will never ignore my gut again.